Okay. With Hashem's help, today's daf is Daf Zion. And we're going to begin from 6 lines, 7 lines from the top. Is that 7? 8, 9 lines from the top. Today's the daf is probably one of the most famous Gemaras in all of Shas. We'll discuss it in a minute. On the Amud Beis. Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. Shmuel Bar Yehuda said, Sholchu lahem Esther lechachomim. Esther sent a message to the Chachamim. Which Chachamim? The Chachamim probably that were living in Eretz Yisrael. It's part of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah who started to move back to Eretz Yisrael in preparation for the beginning of the Beis Hamikdash was the second Beis Hamikdash started to be built at that time. But it was the building was held up. They stopped the construction. So she sent a message to the Chachamim, Kivuni Lidoiris. I want to set up a new holiday for future generations, the holiday of Purim. This is the 14th year of Achashverosh, the second year after it happened. In other words, the cheshbon is that hello, Louis, we just began. The cheshbon is that in the third year of the Achashverosh, he made the party with Vashti. In the 12th year was the story of Haman and his downfall. And then the fighting, which was in the 13th year. And the following year, in the 14th year, which is the final year of Achashverosh's reign, was the question of let's set up this holiday for generations. So Sholchullah, so they sent back a message. We don't want to set up the new holiday Purim. Why? Kina at ma'oris aleinu b'no umas. You're bringing out a jealousy. You're inciting the goyim when they start reading, understanding why we're celebrating a holiday, as we killed out all the Sanim, our enemies. And so this will bring back kina for us, an incitement for us that they'll bring up anti-Semitism. So they didn't want Purim to be a holiday. So she sent back a message. You're not going to get rid of anti-Semitism that way. If you open up the textbooks of the history of the Persian and the Media kings, you will find this story written there. So if they want anti-Semitism, they'll have it anyway. But for us, we need a special holiday. And that's what it was. So it almost like says we're gonna, even though we know that there's going to be a potential anti-Semitism over here, but we need to celebrate our own holidays. And perhaps for this reason is that we have the minig when they say Haman in the Megillah, everybody's stamping and making noise. We want to publicize what we did and how we're celebrating this holiday of our wiping out and erasing the Rishoyim of the Amalek. Says the Gemara, Rav Chanina, Rav Yochanan, all four, Rav Chaviva, all these four Amoraim, Masni, they taught. Bekula Seder Moed, wherever you find, they're a group that set things together in the Seder Moed. Kol ki hayzug, if you find that peer, Chalufi Rabbi Yochanan, take out the word Rabbi Yochanan, Ma'ayil Rabbi Yonasan. It's bring in Rabbi Yonasan. So in other words, the group of people that are going to say the following teaching is Rav Chanina, Rabbi Yonasan, and Rav Chaviva. What's the teaching? That they said over the story. Sholchu lahem Esther lechachamim. Esther sent the message to Chachamim, Kisvuni l'daris. She wants not only that, this is a little different. She wants the Megillah to be written as part of the canon, so that it'll be part of Ksuvim, so that it should be written, it should be treated like other parts of Ksuvim, like Tehillim. And so that's what she says. Kisvuni, write me down l'daris. Sholchullah. So they sent a message to her that we have a pasuk in Mishlei, which they're going to stretch to mean that it discusses the inyan of Amalek. It says, "Haloi kesafti l'chosh lishim." I wrote it down to you 3 times. 3 times in Tanakh we find about Amalek. Twice in the Chumash, once in Parshas B'Shalach, all right, where Yeshua went to war against Amalekim. And then, of course, Parshas Kiseitse, where it says, Zochar es Asher Osel L'chol Amalek, that's 2. And once in Navi, where Shmuel instructs Shoel HaMelech to go to war against Amalekim. So Shlishim, 3 times you're supposed to mention in Tanakh, and not 4 times to mention the Tanakh. So therefore, we can't make a new Megillah to discuss our killing out of Amalekim. It's only supposed to be mentioned 3 times in Tanakh, not 4 times. So therefore, they found for her a pasuk in the Torah, which seems to imply that you could actually have another book in Tanakh which discusses Amalek. Where's this pasuk? The pasuk is right over here, where it's Vayachlesh Yeshua's Amalek ves Amalek vicharef. Yeshua weakened Amalek and his nation by the sword. Vayoyma Hashem el Moshe ksoiv, write it down. Zois, this zikaron, as a remembrance, basefer, in the book. V'sim ba'oznei Yeshua. That's a pasuk in Parshat B'Shalach. So it uses 3 different languages: Zois, Zikaron, Basefer. So we say darshan like this. Back into the Gemara. Ksoiv Zois, Zikaron, Basefer. Ksoiv Zois, write it down. Masha Kosav Kam, what's written here in the Chumash, in Parshat B'Shalach, Uva Mishnah Torah, and what's written also in Mishnah Torah and Sefer Devarim, Parshas Kiseitze. So twice in the Chumash it's mentioned about Amalek. Zikaron is Imasha Kosam and Aviyim. From the word Zikaron, we add another mentioning about Amalek, what's written in Navi, which is written in Sefer Shmuel. Sefer, write it in the book. Masha Kosam and Megillah, what's written in the Megillah. And Megillah actually is called a Sefer, V'nichta Basefer. So we find that Megillah, the Torah hints that there's going to be a 4th time where you're going to write down the story of wiping out Amalek, and that will become part of the Tanakh, the Ksuvim. So the Gemara says, Kitanoi. Not every Tana agreed with this, and some Tanoim had said that it's not really a part of Tanakh, because we see there's a brisa that says, Ksoiv Zois, write it down, Masha Kosa B'kan, what's written in Parshas B'Shalach, Zikaron, Masha Kosa B'Mishnah Torah. The word Zikaron adds what's written in Sefer Devarim, Parshas Kiseitze. Sefer, Masha Kosa B'Neviim. When the Torah writes by Sefer, you add another mentioning what's written in Navi, Sefer Shmuel, and that's it. Divrei Rabbi Yeshua. So according to Rabbi Yeshua, there is no Megillas Esther is not part of Tanakh. So it was almost like Megillas Tanis or something like that, just a book, but not part of the holiness of Tanakh. Rabbi Lazar from Maidi says, no, it is. K'soiv Zois means it applies 2 things. Masha Kosav Kan, Uva Mishnah Torah, what's written here and in Mishnah Torah. Zikara Masha Kosav Neviim. Basefer Masha Kosav Megillah. So he says you can learn 4 things because you combine from the word Zois what's written in Parshas B'Shalach and what's written in Parshas Kiseitze. And therefore we have 2 extras, one to add another time mentioning of Amalek in Navi, and one time Basefer, what's going to be mentioned in Megillah Esther as part of Kesuvim. The Gemara says like this, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel. It seems that Shmuel disagreed also with that Esther is part of Tanakh. He holds that Esther is not part of Tanakh. It's a book, but it's not. He says, Esther ain't a metamas. If you touch Megillas Esther, your hands do not become tummy. What's he talking about? If you were to touch any sefer that's written on parchment, like the Torah, if you go into a bima and Aaron and you touch a sefer Torah, your hands become tummy. If you touch a Navi, your hand become tummy. Why? Because Chazal made a gzeira that you should not touch with your bare hands the Torah of the Navi, because Kahanim used to store their truma right next to a sefer Torah, and they would say this truma is holy, the sefer Torah is holy. Let's put food next to the sefer Torah. Well, you can imagine what happens. Rats came to eat the food, and they also ate part of the sefer Torah nach. So because they say, oh, if you touch a sefer Torah, your hands become tamei, nobody was storing food next to a sefer Torah. Says Shmuel, that applied by every book in Navi, and every book in Ksuvim, but not Esther. Esther is not a holy book, and therefore it does not make your hands become tamei. That's not part of the Gezerah. So that's what the Gemara says. Lememra, the Savashul. Do you want to say that Shmuel holds Esther, the book of Esther, La Beruach HaKodesh Nemra, was not said with Holy Spirit? In other words, it wasn't written with Ruach HaKodesh. V'hama Shmuel, how could it be? V'hama Shmuel did said Esther Beruach HaKodesh Nemra. The book of Esther was written in Ruach HaKodesh. So how could he disagree with himself? He seems to contradict himself. So the Gemara says what he meant to say is Nemra Likros. It was said over that you could read it, that the Ruach HaKodesh was that you should read Esther. But the Nemra Lichtev, it was never said over to write it down. In other words, that it doesn't, the psukim himself are not as important as telling over the story. In other words, it should be like Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. There's no book that tells you how to say the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim on Seder night. You say it over the way it comes to you. So same thing, you tell over the story of Esther. The Chiyuv B'Ruach HaKodesh was that you tell over the story, but you don't have to say it over exactly the way it was written. And Tosfos discusses that. And even if you want to read what it was written, that's only midrabanan, but not you have to use that complete text. So Meisvei, I'll ask you a question against Shmuel. Shmuel is an Amoira, but we find Tanoim who hold that Esther is Matamad Yadayim. Rab Meir says Kehelis ain't a Matamad Yadayim. Kehelis is not such a holy book, and therefore it doesn't make your hands tamei. Well, Machalokes b'Shir Hashem. There was a machalokes between Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beit Shammai is strict and says Shir Hashem is Matami Yadayim, and Beis Hillel says no, Shir Hashem does not Matami Yadayim. Rabbi Yossi says Shir Hashem Matami Yadayim, umachloikis by Kehelis, and the machlokes is by Kehelis, where Beit Shammai says Kehelis is Matame, and Beis Hillel says it's not. Rabbi Shimon Oimer Kehelis just the opposite. Kehelis Mikule Beit Shammai says Kehelis is not Matame Yadayim. Well, Mechumre Beis Hillel, and Beis Hillel is strict and says Kehelis is a holy book, it's Matame Yadayim. But, and here's the point, and here's where the question is. Says the Brisa of a Rus, Shir Hashirim, Esther, Rus, Shir Hashirim, and Esther are holy books, and therefore Matame Nesidayim. They would be Matame, your hands become Tame. So it says, this is Tanoim. And so how could Shmuel says, Esther Einu Matame Nesidayim? Which Tana would Shmuel go along with? And for the Gemara, who the Amak Rabbi Yeshua? Shmuel goes according to Rabbi Yeshua. As you learned before, Rabbi Yeshua holds that Esther was not written, was not Baruch HaKodesh, and the Torah only hints of Amalek in three places. Once in B'Shalach, once in Mishnah Torah, and once B'Sefer, once in Navi. But Rabbi Yeshua holds Esther is not a holy book, and Shmuel agreed with that opinion. New Gemara. Tanya, we learned in a Brisa. Shimon ben Asi Oimer Kehelis Ein Medami Yadayim. Kehelis is not Matami Yadayim, and this is the Musar book of Shlomo HaMelech. Mipnei Shechachmosei Shlomo. So it's the wisdom of Shlomo, but that's not a holy book. It's not a book that you could was written with divine inspiration. It's discussing Kehelis' experiences and opinions. Amr Loi, so the Chachamim said no. The Chusu Bavad Ama, did Kehelis only give over this wisdom? Like Kvanema by Yidabel Shloishes Alaf Mashal. Kehelis had much more to say. Shlomo HaMelech had 3,000 pieces of wisdom. So Kehelis is just one part of it. And there's a pasuk that says Al Toisef Al Davarav. You cannot add on to more than what was written down. Why do we bring this pasuk? Shlomo HaMelech wrote a lot of pieces of wisdom. He said over a lot of pieces of wisdom, but you have a choice. You could write this one down. If you don't want to write it down. So, but they're all pieces of wisdom without any divine Ruach HaKodesh. Tashema al toisif al devarav. You can't add more than what's written down. So, therefore, that implies that with Kehelis, what the Chachamim were telling Rav Shimon ben Asi, Kehelis is such a holy book, and it's albeit it's part of Shlomo HaMelech's wisdom, not all the wisdom, but since this was written down, this is the wisdom that was Baruch HaKodesh, and therefore Kehelis is part of the Tanakh. Tanya, we learned in a Brisa. Again, Rabbi Lezer says, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Nemra. Esther was written down, and it's Baruch HaKodesh. Even though you don't find Hashem's name in Esther, it's not a storybook. It's Baruch HaKodesh. Shenema, because the pasuk says Vayomer Haman beliboy. When Achashverosh said to Haman, "Who do you think I should honor?" So Haman thought in his heart that Achashverosh meant him. Now, how would the writer of the Megillah know what's in Haman's heart? It must be that if it knows what's in Haman's heart, it's because Esther was written down Baruch HaKodesh in a Holy Spirit. So therefore she can write clearly. And Mordechai could write it that that what was going on in Haman's mind. Rabbi Kiva Oime Esther Beruach HaKodesh Nemra. Esther was written over in Ruach HaKodesh Nema because the pasuk says, "Mati Esther noiseis chen be'enei kol re'el." Esther was found attractive in anybody who viewed her. Now, how would you know that? Elamai, it must be that since it was Beruach HaKodesh, the Ruach HaKodesh can say that everybody found Esther attractive. Rab Meir says, Esther Beruach HaKodesh Nemra. Esther was written in Ruach HaKodesh. Shnema by Yevoda Hadavar Mordechai. Mordechai found out that there was an assassination attempt by Bixum Beseresh against Achashverosh. So how would he know that? Elamai, a Malach, a Ruach HaKodesh came and told Mordechai. So Mordechai had Ruach HaKodesh. So when he wrote the Megillah Esther, he wrote it by Ruach HaKodesh. Rabbi Yossi ben Damascus, I have another proof. Esther Beruach HaKodesh Nemra, Shnema, because the pasuk says, Uva Biza lo shalchu yas yadam. When the Jews went to war, killing out their enemies, right, on the 13th day of Adar, nobody touched any of the spoils. They didn't take one dime for themselves. Now, how would you know that? How would you know? Maybe one Jew slipped something into his pocket, a nice watch or something like that, from the people that he killed. But since it says clearly nobody took the spoils, it must be that this was Ruach HaKodesh. Amar Shmuel says, if I was there amongst this conversation trying to prove that Esther was written Beruach HaKodesh, Havamina Milsa da Difna Mekulo, I would have said something that's a pasuk that really is much more clearer that Esther Beruach HaKodesh Nemra. Shenema, because the pasuk says in Megillah Esther, Kimu, they kept, Vikiblu, they accepted. Now this pasuk, that's talking about Purim. They kept and accepted. Now, which comes first? Accepting comes first, and then you keep. So it should say the opposite: kiblu and then kimu. So why does it say this way? Kimu v'kiblu. So we darshan kimu lamala masha kiblu lamata. Whatever we accepted on this world at Purim and is a yontiv, and that we're going to read Megillah Esther, in Shemayim they started keeping it as well. So it must be that the whole thing was Ruach HaKodesh. It says that in Shemayim they agreed that this whole book was written by Ruach HaKodesh. Amar Rava said, examining all the proofs that shows from Megillah Esther that it was written by Ruach HaKodesh, L'kuli islu pirchai. I have a question in every one of the Tanoim's proofs, L'bar mid Shmuel, but Shmuel, the Amoira, the less le pirchai, I have no question on it. The Rabbi Lezer's proof was Vayayma Haman Beliboy. So that doesn't prove that it was Ruach HaKodesh, because it's quite obvious that when Haman was talking, he probably meant himself, because Svarahu, it's logical. There was nobody as important to the king as Haman himself. So Haman must have thought that Achashverosh meant himself. When he was adding that all the trappings that what should be done for such a person that the king wants to honor, he certainly meant himself. It couldn't logically, it makes sense that he would think of himself. The Rabbi Kiva has a question. What was Rabbi Kiva's raya? That Esther was attractive in anybody who saw her. So how do you know? Dilma Karablaza, the Ama Malamed Shekol Echad Echad Bidmasa Loi Kumasa. Esther had that look, right? She had a physical look that anybody who looked at her thought that she was from his or her nationality. And when you see somebody good looking from your nationality, it's much more attractive to you. And that's why everybody was attracted to her. Not that all of a sudden she looked one way and everybody was attracted to her. She looked many different ways. She had a different myriad of looks within her. And therefore, every nationality thought that Esther came from her nation, and you're most attracted to someone that comes from your nation. So that makes sense. It wasn't like a divine thing. Rab Meir said, how did Mordechai know that they're attempting Bixen Asarish and attempting an assassination attempt on him? So the Gemara says, Dilma Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Maybe he held the story went like Rabbi Chia bar Abba. The Oma Bixen Asarish Tarshishim Hoya. They were two Turks, and therefore, and Mordechai was familiar with their language, so he overheard them talking. So it wasn't a divine inspiration that Mordechai knew that there was an assassination attempt on Achashverosh. He actually overheard the conversation. Well, the Rabbi Yossi ben Damascus's proof was that nobody touched the spoils of war. How would they know that? Maybe there was messengers coming from all corners of the world, all the countries of Achashverosh, telling them that the Jews did not even touch any of the spoils of the war. So it's not a proof from those psukim clearly that Esther was written Baruch HaKodesh. But the Shmuel, the pasuk of Kimu v'Kiblu, Vade Leslei Pircha, there's no question to that. Amar Ravina says, Hainu Amar Inshe, that's what people say. There's one great pepper that is much sharper than a whole basket full of gourds. In other words, that even though Shmuel is smaller in stature compared to all the Tanoim, but he said such a sharp thing that he demonstrated that he's somehow more effective than the other Tanoim in their proofs of that Esther was Ruach HaKodesh. Then the Gemara brings two more proofs from Amoraim. Rav Yosef says you can bring it proof because the pasuk says in Esther, "V'mei hapurim ve'erel loy yavar mitoich haYehudim." The days of Purim will never be pushed away from the Jews. The Jews will always celebrate Purim. Now, how could you write that document and know for sure that 1,000 years later, people will still be keeping Purim? It must be Esther's written Baruch HaKodesh. Rav Nachman Yitzchak Mohacha v'zichron liyosef mizarim. The mentioning of the Megillah will not stop from the children. In other words, the offspring of children of generations later will always be reading the Megillah. Now, how could the Megillah Esther write that in Megillah Esther, not knowing what's going to happen 1,000 years in the future? It must be that the whole Esther is written with divine inspiration. Every pasuk is a holy pasuk, and you can be medayik from every pasuk. The Gemara says that you do on the Mishnah says that you give matanis le'evyonim. You have to give gifts to the poor, and give mishlayach manas. Tanu Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef taught umishlayach manas ish l're'eyu. You're supposed to send two gifts, two portions of food, one person to a man, to his friend. Shtei manas, two portions of food, li'ishecha to one person. So you're giving your friend a gift of two portions of food that he's going to use technically for the Su'udas Purim. It could be a rich person, it could be a poor person. So, but what's important, since it's you want to give something important that's going to be felt that respected and appreciated. That's why the requirement is two portions to one person. Matanis le'evyonim, gifts to the poor, two gifts to two poor people. So you have the halach is shtei matanis. You have to give two individual gifts, whether it's money or individual gifts. L'shnei b'nei adam, to two different poor person. One, so since you're giving a poor person, even one gift per poor person is good enough. So those are the two mitzvahs, b'shlayach manas, matanis le'evyonim, that a person's required to do on Purim. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, Rabbi Yehuda, the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, Shada le Rabbi Shaya, he sent for shlach manas to Rabbi Shaya, atma, the thigh, the igla tilsa, of a calf that's born that was the third one of its mother. So it's a very high quality meat. And he, in addition to that, so a piece of meat he sent, the garba de chama, and a flask of wine. So it's two different things. One's food, one is drink. So shalach lei. So Rabbi Shaya sent to him. We go to Zayin Amar Beis. Kiyamta bonu, you mekayim the mitzvah mishlayach manas ish l're'eyu. You kayim the mitzvah of two portions, man to his friend. That even with wine you could be yaitzer. Says the Gemara. This Gemara is the following Gemara is even al pi Kabbalah. It's hard. You'll see later in a second. Rabba Shadar Le Lamori Bamar Biyadabaya. Rabba was trying to send Shlach Manas to Mori Bamar, and who is his messenger? Abaya. Abaya grew up in the house of Rabba, so Abaya is like the young lad who's going to be carrying over the Shlach Manas to Mori Bamar. So Rabba was sending Maloi Taske de Kasva, a basket full of dates, Umaloi Kasa Kimcha de Avshin, and dried out wheat kernels. Dried out wheat kernels that when you make flour, it's going to be very sweet. So it's like common food. So Amalei Abaya, so the messenger Abaya said, Hashta Amamari, Murray is not going to appreciate what you're sending here. It's too plain. If the basket that you used to carry when you were a townsperson, when you were just a villager, now that you became king, you still didn't remove the basket that you carried as a villager. In other words, you became king and you're still sending like common foods. You're sending a corned beef sandwich or something for shlach manos. That's not appropriate for someone of your stature. That was Abaya's comment to what Rabbah wanted to send to Mori Bamar. So he changed it and he sent to him a basket full of ginger, the people in a cup full of pepper, arich of long pepper, sharp things. Amar Abaya, that's also no good. Hashta Amar, Mori Bamar is not going to appreciate this. He's going to say, Anosh Shadari Lechuya. I sent to Rabbah sweet things. My shlach manos is sweet. But Ihu Shadali Churfan, he's sending me something sharp. Amar Abaya. So Rabbi is saying when he got to the house of Mori Beimar, Kinefaki mi Beimar, first when I went out of Rabbah's house to go on the Shlachmanas trip, Hava Savannah, I was full. I didn't need to eat anything. Kimatai lahosam, when I got to Mori Barmar's house, Kirivele Shitin Sa'id, they brought me 60 plates. The Shitin Mini Kedera, there's 60 different types of food on it. Va'achlu bahu Shitin Pluge, and I ate a little bit from each of those plates. So they brought him 60 different dishes on different plates, and I take a piece of each item of food they brought me. Ubishula basraisa, and the last thing they brought me, the last cooked food they brought me, have a correlate sali kedar. They called it roasted in the pot. It was such a type of food that was roasted in its own juices. You didn't add water; it wasn't cooked. It was so delicious. And I wanted to eat the plate, and that was so good that the plate itself seemed to be edible. Amar Abaya. So Abaya said like this: when I realized what happened, I ate so much, even though I came in very full. People say this folk saying, Kofin anya v'layada. A poor person's hungry and he has no idea he's hungry. I thought I was full when I left Rabbah's house, and I came there and all of a sudden I'm eating away. I have this voracious appetite. Iname. Other than that, I could only say that the reason why I ate so much, there's always room for a sweet dessert. And therefore, that's why I ate so voraciously in his house. This is a Bederach Remez, what Abaya meant to say over here. But it could be, I saw that from the Chassam Sofer, that he meant to say is that when he got to Mori Barmar's house, Abaya felt that he learned so much by Rabbah that no one can teach him anything. And here, Mori Bamar brought him out the 60 tractates in Talmud, the 60 tractates in Mishnayos, and he taught him something from each and every Masechta. And so he was so enamored by it that the final Masechta that they were learning together was Tzali Kedar, a remez to Masechta Psachim. And this is a month before Pesach time, so Abaya wanted to have more of that food to even eat the plate. So what you learn from Abaya learned from this, that sometimes you think you know, and then you don't realize how hungry you really are. A person fools himself into thinking that you know. And then you meet somebody else, and then you realize there's so much more I need to know. And also, in depth, you could learn always the Torah, even though that you get it on the surface, but there's always a deep depth to it. That Abaya was come to the realizations when he came to the realization when he got to Mori Bamar's house. The Gemara says, Abaya bar Ava Rechnina bar Abba Mechalpin Sudasai Laudodi. They would each make the Sudas Purim. 1 year it was in Abba bar Marvin's house, and 1 year is Reb Chniya bar Oven's house. So they would invite each other to the Sudas Purim, which was nice. Amar Rava, and this is why this is one of the most famous dafim in Shas. Amar Rava said, Michayav inish libsume bepuria adaloyoda bein oramart haman levarach marche. A person is supposed to get high, drunk on Purim until he doesn't know the difference between Or Haman and Baruch Mordechai. It seems that the way they learn Pshat here is that there was a long song that began like on the Aleph base. Or Haman, Baruch Mordechai, Gimel was something else, Dalet, the Gimel Dalet, Hey Vav, and you got the simon that you got so drunk is that you can't finish the poem. So you could only start off Ara Haman and Baruch Mordechai, and you can't even finish the poem. That's how high you are. Then the Gemara says, so you're supposed to get very, very drunk. So the Gemara says, Rabba Rab Zera Av Sudas Param Bahadei Adodi. Rabba and Rab Zera would make the Sudas Param inviting each other. Ibasam, they got drunk. So the Gemara says, Kom Rabba Shchate Rab Zera. Rabba got up in his drunkenness, and it seems that he slaughtered and killed Rab Zera. That's what it seems to imply, that he killed him. Others learn that he got him very, very sick because he made Rab Zera drink too much. So he got very sick. His intestine, he felt like he squeezed. Sachte means he felt his stomach hurting, that it was squeezing him. Anyway, so either he died or he got very sick. Lamacha, the next day, Rabba realized what happened, that Rab Zera is very sick. Boya rachmei b'achi. He davened Hashem and he did Tchias HaMesim. L'shana, the next year, Rabba wanted to invite him again. Amalei nesim avanedis sudas purim b'hadei dodi. Let's go make sudas purim together with each other. So Rabba invited him. Amalei. So Rab Zera says, "Nah, I'm afraid I'm gonna get killed again, or I'm gonna get sick." And loy b'chol shata v'shata misrachas nisha. Not every year I'm going to be zoicha to be an ace, to be healed or come back to Tchias HaMesim. So let's have our own private Sudas Purim away from each other. For this reason, that some wanted to learn pshat, that the halacha changed. Originally, the halacha was to get drunk on Purim, but because of this story, the psak changed that you don't get drunk on Purim. Others learn no. That's just the point. The fact is that they wanted to have it with each other, shows that there is a mitzvah to get drunk on Purim. Nahara upashte. Amar Rava. Rava said, Sudas Purim sh'achala b'layla. A Sudas Purim that you ate at night, right? The night before the day. Layatze de chavasei. Why? My tama, the pasuk says, Yemei mishta v'simcha. You have to do it during the daytime. So Gemara says a story. Rav Ashi have a Yosef Kamei, the Ameimer. Rav Ashi was sitting in front of Ameimer, and they used to have, the schools were open on Purim. And Ameimer is waiting for his students to come into the school on Purim. He was delayed, and rabbis, nobody showed up to the base of Medrash, and Ameimer is ready to give shiur. Amalei, so he said, Ameimer said to Rav Ashi, my time in La'asar Rabbanim, why the rabbis not coming to the shiur? So Rav Ashi answered, Dilma Tridi B'Sudas Purim. Maybe they're in the middle of the Sudas Purim, and that's why they didn't come to the shiur. Amalei, so Ameimer said, but v'loy have afshal mechle beurte. Couldn't they have eaten the Sudas Purim the night before? Today, Purim day, we have our yeshiva open. They should have eaten their Sudas Purim the night before. Amalei, so Rav Ashi said, Lamar, you Ameimer didn't hear the statement. Hada Amar Rava, that Rava said, Sudas Purim sh'achala b'layla. If you eat the Sudas Purim at night, lo yatzu b'chavasi, you did not fulfill your obligation. Amalei, so he said, is it true? Tanim Menei, so Ameimer learned it, Abba Zimne, he learned it 40 times, not to forget it. V'damalei, command the manach b'kisei. This teaching was so part of him, it was almost like it was in his pocket. Like, it was like you don't lose it. You're always touching it and reviewing it. For some reason, he felt this teaching he needed to remember. The Mishnah says, Ein Bain, we'll do this one Mishnah, Ein Bain Yom Tov l'Shabbos el oichel nefesh bilvad. There's no difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos. The malachas that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos to the work that you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov, only cooking. Avada, if you mechala Shabbos, you get skila, and if you mechala Yontiv, you get only a lav. But we're talking about what malachas are permitted on Shabbos versus Yom Tov. So that answer is oichel nefesh, food related preparation. And also we have what we had Beis Hillel who said that since you're allowed to cook food on Yom Tov, you're also allowed to cook up water just for washing your feet. Anything oichel nefesh related. But so the Gemara has a diak. But to prepare food, let's say to sharpen a knife, they're both equal. In other words, just like on Shabbos, you're not allowed to sharpen a knife, Certainly, you also on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to sharpen a knife. Masnisin de like Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbos ala oichel nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda mater. Rabbi Yehuda says, Af machshira oichel nefesh. You're allowed to even have machshire up, appear a knife on Yom Tov, not necessarily cooking, even preparation of an item that will be used for oichel nefesh, that's permitted. So the Gemara says, my time at the Tanakama. What is the reason of Tanakama that it's not, you're not allowed to do that? Because it says, so who, only this preparation of food is permitted, and not a preparation of a tool that will be used to make food. Rabbi Yehuda says, lochem, you're allowed to do anything related to food. Lechem v'chol tzorcheichem. We darshan every yours and anything that you need. Not only cooking the food, but preparing a tool to make the food, that's also permitted. Ve'idach nami, but the Tanakama, what do they do with the word haksiv lechem? It says lechem. So the halachem, they are darshan lechem v'loy legoyim. A Jew is permitted to do oichel nefesh for himself, but not for a goyim. Lechem v'loy leklovim. You're allowed to do it for yourself and not to give it to a dog. Ve'idach, now we ask the reverse. Rabbi Yehuda, what does he do with nami haksiv hu? The word who limits you, that you're only allowed to do cooking, but not preparation of a tool that's going to be used. You're not allowed to use machshiri oichel nefesh. But that seems to be implied in the word who. So how does Rabbi Yehuda use the word who? Ksiv hu, ksiv lechem. So Yehuda will tell you it says the word who, which implies it limits it, and ksiv lechem, which says you could make machshira oichel nefesh. So it depends. Kan b'machshirim she'afshala asoysim erev Yom Tov. If it's a type of preparation of food that you could have done from erev Yom Tov, you had time to do the knife before Yom Tov. So then you're not permitted to do it on Yom Tov. But what you are permitted to do, even machshire oichel nefesh, is b'machshirim she'i efshala soisim erev Yom Tov, a type of machshirim that it would have been impossible to have done on erev Yom Tov. On that, Rabbi Yehuda says, I permit you to do that. So, but that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Our Mishnah that does not mention that as one of the differences between Yom Tov and Shabbos, only mentions oichel nefesh, because our Mishnah holds only oichel nefesh is permitted, preparation of the food itself, but not machshire oichel nefesh. So we'll stop right here. We'll do the Mishnah, Ein Bein Shabbos, Yom Kippurim, or a bunch of Ein Beins for the next day or two.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, fascinating Gemara today. Most well known.
Shikoye.
Agite Nacht.
Gute Nacht.